All right, let's settle down, everyone. I swear, merciful one, shine on me. Silence! The Pantheon hushed, even the echoes almost immediately fading to nothing. The Parliament addresser took a moment to gather her thoughts and review her notes, then took a deep breath. For a moment, she looked at each one of the Pantheon representatives to ensure that everyone was present. It was common for several to skip summits, but thankfully, everyone was present. No thanks to the summit being listed as a state of emergency gathering. First, I would like to extend my gratitude for everyone's punctual attendance. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, the college would not make summons such as this without a good reason. This relates to the state of war front on the upper Secundus quarter of the Third Galactic Tail. As a refresher, the Third Tail was unexplored territory, but did indicate signs of intelligent life. We sent exploration vessels into the Black to make contact, upon which our diplomats extended the invitation to our pantheonic clergy. A muttering coursed through the representatives, no doubt coming from traditionalist species that opposed the idea of younger species having the same rank as them. They were silenced as the addresser let out a harsh sigh. However, this new species responded with hostility to our invitation and murdered our diplomats.
"Addresser, that is untrue," one of the representatives chirped, a grade chitinous being. "The revised collegiate diplomatic conventions state assimilation as the standard, not
Enough of your politically charged slander, Representative Vice, the addresser growled, tempering her fury at the slander of the college. This marks the third warning you have incurred for your people, so I encourage you to remain silent for the duration of the summit. After a breath to steady herself and to silence the chuckles, she continued. War was formally declared after we received news of our diplomat's murder. This was 2 collegiate standard years ago, and per the recruitment data we have achieved record-breaking numbers of recruits. Heroic voyages into the unknown must be appealing to the masses. Now, for the purposes of the summit, shortly before we made contact with the new enemy, the Erudite Foundation made contact and was met with similar barbarism. The Erudites alerted us of this recently. There were mutters, this time the addresser allowing them to talk amongst themselves, if briefly. The college has been in talks with the Erudites about a ceasefire between themselves and our pantheonic clergy. A vote will be cast in the near future, and the college will, as always, provide their recommendations. In the meantime, I will hand you off to our chief xenologist, Senior Observer Oyist. The Parliament addresser stepped down from the pulpit, leaving a slate in case Senior Observer needed it. She took his seat in the sec behind the pulpit, allowing her a good enough view of the representatives. The Senior Observer, a life form of callous sinew partly masked by long strands of chitin and ivory, took to the pulpit. He neatened up his stack of papers several times over, spindly fingers nervously jittering as he did so. The observer was likely the oldest in the room by several factors, as evidenced by the archaic methods of note-taking. Nervously, he fiddled with the microphone until he was certain his voice was being transmitted.
"The new enemy is rather peculiar species, I must say. They are incredibly primitive, as you must know by the aggressive rejection they gave us. Studies from specimens recovered from the front lines indicate that they are a base life form, not having surpassed the evolutionary stage where they developed advanced neurological processes or shed recessive anatomy such as excess mass. Goodness, they have barely begun to form shelling on the distal points of forelimbs."
The observation earned a universal chuckle from the representatives, even the ever-agitating Vaius.
Continuing on, their culture is also very bizarre. There is very little to speak of. Their science is rather primitive, and their religions and practices are really quite infantile. There is very little substance in even the most prominent beliefs they seem to have."
The senior observer paused to skittishly flick through his notes, quickly trying to find a certain page. As soon as he did,
"And right here, I found that their system of governance relies on a really quite archaic methodology. They determine who the strongest is by word of mouth. They barely even have displays of it. It's almost like how herds of Fenric cattle determine their alpha. And lastly, their armament. Here. They have rather simple ranged weapons, and their spacecraft is embarrassingly simplistic, even by the lowest of standards."
The observer paused again, doing his best to calm himself after getting so worked up over his own research. While he did, discussion broke out. Many representatives began openly wondering why the college would risk sending out diplomats instead of first observing the new species to avoid the loss of them. However, many more countered by stating that until now they had never encountered such primitive creatures that were capable of making technology.
"Attention, if you would, representatives,"
the observer said, finally having recovered himself. The representatives took their time calming down, only ceasing when the parliament addresser stood up. She didn't even need to take a step towards the pulpit for quiet to return.
"Now that I have given you an adequate, if elementary description of the new enemy, I will return you to the parliament addresser."
He quickly shuffled away, nodding to the addresser as he returned to his seat. "Thank you, Senior Observer. I'm now going to hand you off to our second Grand General. I must warn you that he is presently stationed on the front lines against the new enemy, so it is very possible that some upsetting imagery will be present. If you are sensitive to such things, please avert your gaze but maintain attention. The General will be briefing you on the state of the conflict with first-hand experience, though I am sure it will be merely a report of the success of such a pitiable species." The addresser quietly navigated through her slate, initiating the large hologram that displayed the open summons to the second Grand General. It took a minute to connect, but the General was on the other end. The General was a rather well-known public hero, a hulking mass plated with dense chitin and ivory, and with a cortex sufficiently extended enough to rival even the capabilities of the aging senior observer Oist. But that wasn't the creature that was on the display. Instead of a storied officer stationed on a decorated bridge, the Pantheon was met with the image of a withered cripple hunched in a hospital wing's cot. The sheets were stained with a foul pink bile, and a sour yellow mucus dripped from the creature's mouth. The chitin covering the General was cracked, in many places outright missing and exposing the savaged grey and red meat beneath. In areas where chitin and ivory remained, there was evidence of scorching. In many places, the shelling almost melted through. The General himself was quivering slightly, gripping the frame of the cot with his only remaining hand to stifle the shudder as best he could. After minutes of silence, what used to be the second Grand General looked up at the video transmitter with clouded, blind eyes. The Parliament addresser, snapping out of her trance, began fervently trying to sever the transmission with the General. She had no idea he was like this. If she did, she wouldn't have dared make a summons. The General had lied to the college about his condition, and he clearly had a message the representative shouldn't hear. But as her repeated attempts failed, she realized that, as there was a state of emergency, the second Grand General could override the message protocols. She couldn't cut him off.
"Representatives,"
the General hissed, his once commanding voice now a weak, rasping noise.
"At this point, the addresser has tried and failed to sever this live transmission. But I urge you all to listen, even you, addresser."
Though near fatally wounded, the General was surprisingly composed. The addresser felt a coldness inside her, fear of what the general had to say, and fear of what that may cause.
The senior observer gave me the same speech that you were just subjected to. Fettered blasphemy is what it is.
The representatives all let out hushed gasps, balking at the impudent speech.
I urge you, whatever the college tries to tell you, whatever their recommendations are, you must ally with the Erudites at all costs. However unclean and unsavory you may find them, you must begin mass conscription, mass industrialization. We cannot defeat the new enemy without doing so.
Uproar. The representatives were yelling at the general, at the senior observer, at the other college members behind the pulpit, at each other, even at their now fearful aides. Slates and paperweights and even translators were being thrown across the pantheon. All manner of vulgarities were spewed. Some representatives began getting physical with one another. The parliament addresser began screaming into the microphone for order, still trying to terminate the transmission. The senior observer covered behind his seat, clutching his notes to his chest and swearing he was right. Several college members were quickly typing into their slates, others making not-so-subtle exits. The chaos only began to fade into order when the general began violently coughing, spewing more pink bile into his sheets as medical staff rushed to him, fixing a rebreather to his head and beginning to insert IVs of strangely colored substances. After several minutes of ragged breathing, the general looked back up at the video transmitter.
I have seen them firsthand, what this new enemy can do. They are infantile, primitive creatures. Their technologies are not feeble. This new enemy, they don't operate as a unit. They aren't a composed military, but they are not barbaric or simplistic by any means. I have watched countless struggles fall in minutes. These things, all it takes for the new enemy to take down miles of emplacements in one single small creature no taller than my abdominal. They are smart, clever, cunning. A single one of their soldiers can operate with full autonomy and can summon a rain of ammunitions so expensive it must cost tenfold what it does to build a convex. I have watched a single one of them slaughter my soldiers mercilessly, wiping out entire fortresses before we can even deploy support units. It has cost me hundreds of good, experienced, worthy soldiers to bring down so much as one of them. They bleed, but they can bleed for far longer than such a small thing should. And their weapons, their weapons, technologies that our ancestors forgot for fear of the danger. This new enemy, they use it indiscriminately. They use the forbidden weapons, the unholy fire.
Another uproar began to rise, representatives roaring about blasphemy and the impossibility of crafting such a thing, for the rarity and complexity of the manufacturing, not to mention the devastating effects that it would leave on anything it comes close to. If something could create such a weapon, it would be impossible for them not to fear the eternal consequences.
Look at me!
The general screamed, his outburst punished by a short fit of coughs. Spitting bile, he continued.
Look at me, and my marred ivory, my melted carapace, my festering meats. Look at it. Your elders scared you into submission with stories their elders told them about unholy fire. Look at me, my irradiated, dying body, my melted eyes. Is this not what your elders spoke of?
Another fit of coughs began to overtake the general, bile spraying with each violent convulsion, as medical staff swarmed him again, doing what they could to fight the agonizing death that was sure to take the general. One of them moved to shut the feed as to not to traumatize the representatives, but as they did, the general hissed out one final warning.
The new enemy, when they summoned the unholy fire, as I lay there, burning, I watched it. It was laughing.